I've had some questions about carburetor adjustment, so I'm going to do a video on it. These are the two types of carburetors you'll find on the Kohler engines I've been messing with lately. They fit the 6 to 8 horsepower engines. This one here has Carter Model N in the casting. This one don't have a name in it, just a few small numbers. They're both Kohler parts. They both have the same general layout and the same screws and adjustments. This here is also a Carter Model N, but it's smaller. It's got a smaller bore. It's made for 4 horsepower engines. What's nice about that is they have the same parts inside, so they use the same rebuild kit. So there's 3 screws on here. This screw that goes sideways is merely a stop for the idle speed. So when you turn this screw, it holds that idle plate open a little bit more. There's 2 fuel mixture adjustment screws here. The one on the top is the main fuel mixture adjustment, and the one on the side here is the idle fuel mixture adjustment. So this one on the side only controls fuel mixture when you're idling. The one on the top is the main fuel mixture adjustment. Now it does have an effect on the idle a little bit, so you need to do your main adjustment first and then do the idle adjustment after that. I'm going to describe this while I'm sitting at the table first so you can hear what I'm saying, and then I'll go out and try it on a tractor while it's running. The book says if you need to make the fuel mixture adjustment, you want to start with your main needle and turn it in until it just barely stops. You don't want to put any pressure on it because you can cause damage in there. So counting from where it stops, I'm going to back this out 2 turns. So there's half, 1, half, 2. Now this one you do the same way. I'm going to turn it in until it stops. Don't put much pressure on it. And this one I'm going to turn out 1 1/4 turns. So there's a half, 1 1/4. And that's where you start. This idle speed setting is not that critical and should be set sufficiently from the factory, or at least a good place to get started. Once you get it running, you want to do the main adjustment first. So you want to give it some gas. I usually go about 3/4 throttle at first. The book says to do this part under full throttle and a good load if possible. I would recommend doing it after the engine warms up a bit. So while you're running at full throttle, you're going to turn this main screw each direction. So if you go clockwise first, you turn it in until the engine starts to slow down, and note where that position is. Bring it back to where it runs a consistent speed, and then you keep opening it up until it starts to slow down again, and you note where that position is. And then you move it back to a position halfway between those 2 points. The idle adjustment is very similar. So you move the throttle to the idle position. You want to set the idle speed with this screw so that it's idling at the proper speed. And then you treat this screw similar to the other one. You're going to turn it in until the engine starts to slow down. Note that position. And then you turn it back out until the engine starts to slow down again, and note that position. And you put your screw halfway in between. So I'm going to go try that on a running tractor. One note about this 4-horse carburetor, the idle speed adjustment's in a different position because it's made a little bit differently. But the 2 fuel mixture screws are in the same position. When I'm going to adjust a carburetor on a tractor that's already been running, even if it don't run that good, I want to find out where the screw position is now. So I'm going to turn these in until they lightly bottom out and count the turns. The main adjustment is 3.5 turns. The idle adjustment is 2.25 turns. I'm going to go clockwise first. There's a half turn. No change yet. There's 1 turn, and the throttle lever is starting to move around. At 1.5 turns it starts to struggle. Now I come back slowly and wait for it to stabilize. At a half turn back it's steady again. So that's 1 turn from where I started. Now I'm going the other way. There's a half turn, no change yet. There's 1 turn and it's starting to move around a bit. 1.5 turns, moving slightly still. At 2 turns it's getting more slowly. At 1.5 turns it's still moving. At 1 turn out it looks like it's steady again. That's 1 turn from where I started at, so I'm going back to my starting position on this one. Now for the idle screw. There's a half turn. One turn, no change yet. One and a half turns. There's where it slows down, so I'm opening back up until it gets steady. And at about 1.5 turns from where I started, it's stable. Now I'm going back out where I started, and you can hear it slowing down already, so that's too far. I'm going back in and watch for it to stabilize. Here's a spot where half turn one way slows it down, and half turn the other way slows it down. So I'm going to leave it in the middle. Well, let's see where they ended up. The main adjustment needle is 3.5 turns out. And that's where we started at, so that was already a good position. Now the idle screw is 1.25 turns out. So that's 1 turn less than it was before. Okay, so what if I do what the book says and set this thing at 2 turns before I start? When I try to rev it up to set it, it won't do it. So I'm going to turn the screw to improve it. If I would have turned it clockwise, it would have run worse. And I should have done that to demonstrate it. I like to turn the screw a half turn and wait a bit because it takes time for it to react. And it should be repeatable. If it slows down at a certain point, it should always slow down there. Or else you need to look for another problem. Well, let's see where it ended up. That's at 3.5 again. So that's where that one likes to be. Okay, let's try it on a different tractor. This is an 856. It's also an 8 horsepower Kohler. I'm using these early square hoods for this because you can open the hood and get to the carburetor easy. Don't have to unbolt anything. So I'm getting my starting points here. Looks like the main adjustment is at 2.25 turns. And it looks like the idle adjustment is at 1/2 turn. So that's different. There's a 1/2 turn, no change. Wow, there's a change. That drops off pretty quickly there. So right there's the lower limit of where it runs good. Now I half turn to get back where I started. I open a half a turn. That looks like it's slowing down already. When I go back in a half turn, it's slow to react. So I'm going down to the lower limit again and come out slowly. I think I'm getting to the upper limit, only a quarter turn out from where it was. So there's only 3/4 turn there where it runs good. I'm putting it in the middle of that. And now for the idle screw. Remember, this one was only a half a turn from being closed. That closes all the way and don't change anything. Don't sound like it's idling too fast. I'll slow it down and try again. Well, this is one of them new imported carburetors, so I need a Phillips screwdriver. Okay, this adjustment still don't do anything, so I'm going to open it up a little. Yep, I'd have to say that does absolutely nothing. So there's got to be something wrong in that carburetor. This is one of them new imported ones they've been making lately. It's been on here for a year or two. Well, it's always run good, so I'm not going to change anything. Well, let's see where this one ended up. Well, that's 2 1/8 turns. So that started out at 2 1/4. So that's not much of a change. And that idle screw is still at a half a turn because it didn't do anything. Well, there you go. I tried 2 different carburetors on similar tractors, and they're both totally different. So I can't tell you where to set those screws for your carburetor, because they're all going to be different. I guess the bottom line is get in there and try turning those screws. Count how many turns out they are before you start, so you can put them back where they were if it doesn't fix anything. If it makes it worse, go the other way. And if it don't improve no matter which way you go, you need to look for a different problem. I have pretty good luck fixing carburetor problems just with a good cleaning. Now on that first carburetor, where the main adjustment screw was 3 1/2 turns out, that could be because there's a tiny piece of dirt partially clogging an orifice somewhere. That makes it a little bit harder for fuel to get drawn up the tube, and you have to open up the screw a little bit more to compensate. So if I take that one apart and clean it, the final adjustment might be closer to the 2 turns they talk about in the book. Also, the ethanol fuel they use nowadays don't help. If you have a tractor that you don't run very much, I'd recommend using non-ethanol fuel and a fuel stabilizer. Alright, that's it.